His last words to his father were, "Oh shit." Then the line went silent. Brian Swanson stayed on the call, listening for anything. There was nothing. He had been on the phone with his son for 47 minutes, the two of them trying to find each other on rural Minnesota gravel roads in the middle of the night. Brandon Swanson has never been heard from since. It was just past 2:30 in the morning on May 14th, 2008. Brandon was somewhere on foot in rural southwestern Minnesota. He was 19 years old, a student at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, studying wind turbine technology. The night before, he had been celebrating the end of the spring semester with classmates. On the drive home, his car had gone into a ditch. He was uninjured. The car was undamaged. He had called his father. He told him he could see distant lights and that he was going to walk toward them, that he believed they were the town of Lynd. According to cellular records later obtained by investigators, he was wrong. He was not near Lynd. He was 25 miles from where he believed himself to be, walking in a different direction entirely. His parents reported him missing at 6:30 that morning. In the 18 years since, the Lyon County Sheriff's Office, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and the FBI have all worked the case. Cadaver dogs followed his scent 3 miles from where the car was eventually found. The trail ended at the Yellow Medicine River. He was not in the river. Where the trail goes from there has never been established. To understand what happened in the early hours of May 14th, it helps to go back to the night before, to the gathering in Canby, to the drive home Brandon never finished. Brandon Victor Swanson was 19 years old in the spring of 2008. He was a student at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, a small two-campus school serving the agricultural counties of southwestern Minnesota. His campus was in Canby, a town of roughly 2,000 people, 20 miles from the South Dakota border. He had just completed his first year in the college's wind turbine technology program. He had grown up about 40 miles east, in Marshall, a small farm country town that anchored the region. 5'6", 120 pounds, brown hair, blue eyes, legally blind in his left eye. He lived at home with his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson. He worked. He was, by all accounts, the kind of 19-year-old who called his parents. On the evening of Tuesday, May 13th, 2008, Brandon attended a small end-of-semester gathering at a friend's house in Canby. According to his father, who would later speak about that night in multiple interviews with the Marshall Independent and other outlets, Brandon had been drinking, but not heavily. The friends he had been with later told investigators he had been calm and coherent through the evening. He had work the next morning. He had told them he needed to head home. He left Canby sometime around midnight. The geography of southwestern Minnesota is worth understanding here, because the case takes place inside it and is shaped by it. It is a flat agricultural plain, sugar beet country, soybean country, corn country, wind turbine country. The towns are small and far apart. The roads between them are mostly long, straight runs, paved for the main routes and graveled for the local ones. In May 2008, before the crops were up, there were almost no landmarks. There was farmland to the horizon, and the horizon was a long way out, and there was almost no light. The nearest town in any direction from where Brandon would eventually end up was miles away. Streetlights, in the spaces between towns, did not exist. It is a place where, on a clear, cold spring night, a person can see lights 10 or 15 miles away and have no way to know how far away they are. It was around 12:30 in the morning when Brandon called his parents for the first time. According to Brian and Annette Swanson, who have given multiple interviews over the years, to CNN, to the Pioneer Press, to the Marshall Independent, to the Star Tribune, Brandon told them his car had gone into a ditch. He was unhurt. The car was not damaged. It was simply stuck. He told them he believed he was on a road near Lynd, a small town about 7 miles southwest of Marshall, and asked if they could come pick him up. Brian and Annette got in their car together. They drove the route. They reached Lynd. They drove the roads around Lynd. They did not find Brandon. They did not find his car. They did not find any indication that he had been on any of those roads at all. Brandon, on the phone, was confused. He could not tell them which road he had taken. He could not see well in the dark. He had left his glasses in the car. He told his father he could see lights off in the distance. He said he was going to start walking toward them. What he was seeing, the lights, has never been identified. In every interview Brian Swanson has given, he has been asked the same question, and he has given the same answer. He does not know what lights Brandon was looking at. He does not know whether they were a town, a farmhouse, a passing vehicle, a yard light, or something else. Brandon, on the phone, described them only as lights. He thought they were Lynd. They were not Lynd. At around 1:40 in the morning, Brandon began walking. Brian Swanson, on the phone with his son, made a decision. Annette took her own vehicle to keep covering ground in one direction. Brian himself stayed in his car, alone, and drove. He had told Brandon to head for the parking lot of a particular bar in Lynd. He would meet him there. He stayed on the phone. For 47 minutes, Brian Swanson drove and listened. Brandon, walking, narrated what he was seeing: the lights, the fields, the fence lines. He told his father where he thought he was. He sounded, by his father's account in interviews afterward, calm. He even joked. There was, in the moments Brian Swanson has described publicly, nothing about the call that suggested anything was wrong. Until the end of it. Brandon was walking through fields. That much is documented. The scent dogs would later confirm it. Investigators eventually traced roughly 3 miles of his path. He was on foot, in the dark, in mid-40-degree temperatures, in the rural agricultural country he had grown up adjacent to, but did not know intimately. He was wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt, what he had been wearing when he left the gathering. He had no flashlight. He had no jacket. He had no glasses. He had a phone. He was on it. He was talking to his father. He kept telling Brian he could see the lights. He was approaching them. He thought he was almost there. The 47 minutes were not silent. Brian Swanson has described, in interviews over the years, what they were like. Brandon was, throughout the call, lucid. He was navigating. He was looking for street signs. He was checking landmarks against what he could see, which was not much, in May, before sunrise, with no moon to speak of. He could see his father's headlights in his imagination, somewhere to the east of him. Brian could not see anything but his own. At one point during the call, Brandon thought he was crossing a paved road. Brian asked him what he could read on any signs. Brandon could not read any signs. There were no signs that he could see. He could only see the lights. At another point, Brandon thought he heard Brian's car. He said he was going to wait, that he could hear something coming. Brian, on his end, could hear nothing of Brandon at all. There was no car coming on Brian's stretch of road. Whatever Brandon was hearing was not his father. This is what Brian Swanson has described: a 47-minute call in which a father and a son were within range of the same general region, but never converged. Brandon kept walking. The lights kept being ahead of him. Brian kept driving. The roads kept not having Brandon on them. What Brian Swanson did not yet know, what he would not know until later that day, when investigators obtained Brandon's cellular records, was that Brandon was not where he thought he was. The towers his phone was hitting were not the towers around Lynd. He was nowhere near Lynd. He had been nowhere near Lynd for the entire call. He was 25 miles in a different direction. A note about Brandon here, before the call goes silent. He was 19, and he was a college student, and he was on his way home from a gathering at which he had been drinking. There has, in the years since, been a tendency in some discussion of this case to reduce him to that fact, to assume that whatever happened because he was drunk and disoriented on a country road in the middle of the night. His parents have, in interview after interview, pushed back on this. Brandon did not sound intoxicated to his father during the 47-minute call. He was thinking, he was navigating, he was joking. He was calling his parents at 12:30 in the morning on a country road from a ditched car for help, which his mother has said is the kind of thing he had always done. It is worth saying this clearly, because the case has been speculated about in the long absence, and most of the speculation begins with assumptions about who Brandon was that the documented record does not support. The call had been going on for almost 3/4 of an hour. Brandon had been walking for most of it. Brian had been driving. The two of them were, by Brian's own account, no closer to each other than they had been at the start. Brandon was still seeing lights in the distance. Brian was still driving toward roads that turned out to be empty when he reached them. At one point in the call, Brandon told his father he thought he was crossing a small stream. The night was cold enough that there was still some thin ice in places. He did not slow down. He kept walking. The lights, he kept saying, were just ahead. What investigators would later reconstruct from scent dogs and from the cellular record was that Brandon walked roughly 3 miles during the call. He walked across fields. He walked through pasture. He crossed at least one fence. At one point, he was within a few miles of the Yellow Medicine River, though it is not known when in the call he came closest to it or whether he ever reached its banks. What is known is that he kept walking, and he kept talking to his father, and he kept saying that the lights were just up ahead. It was approaching 2:30 in the morning. Brian Swanson had been on the phone with his son for 47 minutes. He had driven roads he did not need a map for. He had not found Brandon. He had not been able to find Brandon. He was, by his own description in the years since, beginning to be afraid. His son was still on the line. That much, at this moment in the timeline, at 2:28, 2:29, was still true. Then Brandon suddenly said, "Oh shit," and the line went silent. His father, on the other end, did not hear a fall. He did not hear water. He did not hear a struggle. He did not hear a voice, not his son's, not anyone else's. He heard nothing. Brian Swanson stayed on the line. He has described this part in interviews over the years, and he has described it the same way each time. He kept driving, and he kept the phone to his ear, and he kept waiting for his son to say something. He kept saying his son's name. Brandon. 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 There was no answer. There was no sound at all. According to the account Brian have given publicly, to CNN in 2010, to the Pioneer Press, to the Marshall Independent, in family-provided statements over the years, the call did not immediately end after Brandon's last words. The line stayed open. The silence on the other end was an open silence, not a dropped call. How long Brian listened to that silence has been described in different ways at different times. The number that has appeared most often in family interviews is around 20 minutes. He kept the phone to his ear for roughly 20 minutes after his son stopped speaking. He waited for any indication that Brandon was still there. Eventually, he hung up. He called the number back. It rang. He called it again. It rang. It rang every time anyone called it for the rest of that night and into the next day. Then, sometime the following day, it stopped going through at all.
The phone has never been recovered.
The first call to police was at 6:30 in the morning. What Brian and Annette did between approximately 3 in the morning and 6:30 has been described in interviews with the Marshall Independent and in subsequent reporting. They kept driving. They kept calling the phone. They kept covering roads. They were in 2 vehicles, in 2 parts of the county, working separate quadrants. Annette called several of Brandon's friends. None of them had heard from him. None of them had any indication of where he might be. At 6:30, the Swansons contacted the Lynd Police Department. What happened next has been a focus of much of the coverage of this case in the years since. According to Annette Swanson, in interviews she has given for nearly 2 decades, the initial police response did not treat Brandon's disappearance as urgent. She has said on multiple occasions that she was told her son was a legal adult, that this kind of behavior was not unusual for a young man his age, and that he had, in the wording she has quoted from one officer, every right to disappear if he chose to. It is important to note what this assumption rests on and what it ignored. Brandon was not someone who had walked away. Brandon's parents had been on the phone with him. They had heard him say his last words. They had heard the silence after. They knew, with the certainty of having listened to it happen, that whatever had occurred was not voluntary. The police did not, in those first hours, share that certainty. The car was found that afternoon. By then, investigators had obtained Brandon's cellular phone records. This is where the case changed shape, where the geography Brian and Annette had spent the night searching turned out to be the wrong geography. The records placed Brandon's last cellular activity in the area of Porter, Minnesota. Porter is a small town in Yellow Medicine County, roughly 25 miles from Lynd, in a different direction from the route Brandon had been telling his father he was on. The car was located about 1.5 miles north of a county road called Lyon-Lincoln Road, off Highway 68, west of the town of Taunton. The car was in a ditch. It was undamaged. The doors were open. The keys were missing. Brandon's glasses were inside. The keys were never found. This is one of the documented details that has shaped how the case has been considered ever since. A car in a ditch is one thing. A car in a ditch with its doors open, in the middle of the night, with no driver and no keys, is another thing entirely. Brandon was, on the phone with his father, treating the situation as ordinary. He had ditched a car. He needed a ride. He had called home. There is nothing in the documented record of the call to suggest that he had a reason to take the keys with him when he left the vehicle. But the keys were not in the car when investigators arrived. They were not in the ignition. They were not on the floor. They were not on the seat. They were not in the surrounding ground when the area was searched. Brandon either took them with him when he started walking, or someone else removed them at some point after. Both possibilities remain open. Neither has been resolved. The search began in earnest on the second day. It would eventually become one of the largest missing person searches in Minnesota's recent history. According to coverage by the Marshall Independent, the Pioneer Press, and Forum News Service, the effort included airplanes, canine units, hundreds of volunteers, ATVs, divers, and search teams from multiple jurisdictions. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension was brought in. Eventually, the FBI was notified, and Brandon's case was entered into the VICAP database, case number 2010-BDJ-00001, for cross-referencing against other unsolved disappearances. The professional search manager assigned to the case was a man named Jeff Hasse. Hasse runs a public-facing blog called The Search for Brandon Swanson, which he has maintained for years, and which is one of the most detailed published records of the search effort. Hasse's involvement is part of why the search of this case is so well documented. Most missing adult cases do not have a professional search manager attached to them for years. This one did, and does. What the search produced, across days, then weeks, then months, was a scent trail. Cadaver dogs traced Brandon's scent from the car. The trail ran roughly 3 miles. It moved away from where the car was found, across farm fields and pasture, in a direction generally consistent with the lights Brandon had described seeing during the call. The dogs followed it through varying terrain. They followed it across at least one fence line. They followed it until it reached the bank of the Yellow Medicine River. At the river, the trail ended. The dogs did not pick it up on the other side. They did not pick it up further along either bank. They lost it at the water, and they were not able to find it again. A scent trail ending at a river is, in the language of professional search, ambiguous. It can mean the person entered the water. It can also mean the scent dissipated, or that the wind shifted, or that something else interrupted the trail. It does not, by itself, prove what happened. But it was where the dogs lost him. The river was searched. It was searched in the days after the trail ended at it. It was searched in the weeks after. It has been searched, in various forms, multiple times in the 18 years since. Divers, sonar, underwater cameras. In 2021, when a regional drought left the Yellow Medicine River largely dry through long stretches of its course, sections of the riverbed were excavated. Areas where a body could have been deposited or carried were systematically worked through. Nothing related to Brandon Swanson has ever been found in the river. Not remains, not clothing, not the phone, not the keys. This does not, in the strict sense, mean he was not in the river at some point. Rivers move things, currents carry things, and 18 years is a long time. It does mean that the most documented search effort that could be brought to bear on the obvious hypothesis has, repeatedly, returned nothing. There is more, in the geography around where the car was found, that has never been thoroughly searched. The land around the route the scent trail followed is private agricultural land. Most of it is cattle pasture. According to reporting by Forum News Service, some of the landowners in the area have, over the years, denied requests from investigators and volunteers to conduct comprehensive searches on their property. The landowners who declined are reported to have told authorities that they would watch for anything unusual themselves. What this means practically is that some portion of the route Brandon walked on the night of May 14, 2008, has never been searched in any systematic way. The scent trail crossed that ground. The dogs were there briefly. They did not have time or access to work it thoroughly. Whatever is on that ground, if anything is on that ground, has remained there for 18 years. The theories that have surfaced about Brandon's disappearance fall into roughly 3 categories. The first is that Brandon, walking in the dark in a t-shirt in mid-40-degree temperatures in country he did not know intimately, fell into the Yellow Medicine River and drowned. This is the hypothesis the scent trail most directly supports. It is also the hypothesis that the multiple river searches have failed to confirm. Brandon was small, 5'6", 120 pounds. He was not a strong swimmer by family accounts. He was disoriented. He was in conditions that could rapidly produce hypothermia. If he had reached the river and entered it, whether on purpose or by stepping into it in the dark, drowning is a documented possibility. The absence of any physical recovery, after 18 years and multiple searches, is what keeps this theory from being treated as the explanation. The second is that Brandon died of exposure in the open agricultural country between where he started walking and where the scent trail ended. The temperatures were cold enough. He was dressed lightly. He had been walking for the better part of an hour by the time the call ended. If he had stopped, or fallen, or simply slowed down enough that the cold could take him, he could have died in a field, in a ditch, behind a tree line, on land that has not been fully searched. 18 years of cattle grazing and crop cycles in the area where the trail ran could have erased physical evidence of remains in that time. The third is the theory that something else happened. That the lights Brandon was walking toward, or someone in the area he was walking through, intervened. The keys missing from the car have been cited in this theory. So has the "oh shit." A 19-year-old walking in the dark in unknown country, suddenly seeing or hearing something that surprises him enough to make him say, "Oh shit," and then producing no further sound on a phone that remained open, is, in this theory, consistent with the possibility that something or someone caused the call to end. None of this is, in the documented record, supported by physical evidence. It is one possibility among others. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office has not publicly endorsed it. There are other theories. Most of them have circulated in the broader true crime discussion of the case over the years, rather than in official investigative materials. Some of them are speculative readings of Brandon's mental state. Some of them invoke explanations the documented record cannot support and that this telling will not adopt. One detail has, in some discussions, been raised as potentially significant. The Motorola SLVR, the model of phone Brandon was using, was known at the time for battery issues. It is possible that Brandon's "oh shit" was a reaction to seeing his phone's battery die. He was, in this reading, about to be alone in the dark without a way to communicate with his father. The phone going silent on Brian's end would then be the result of the battery, not of anything that happened to Brandon. This is a possibility. It does not explain why the phone, after the call ended, still rang for a period before stopping. It does not explain why Brandon did not, on regaining any access to power or signal, contact anyone. It does not explain the missing keys. It does not explain why, in the 18 years since, no trace of him has been recovered. It is a possibility. It is not the answer. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office has not endorsed it. In 2009, the year after Brandon disappeared, the state of Minnesota passed a law named after him. Brandon's law requires Minnesota law enforcement agencies to begin an investigation immediately when a person of any age is reported missing. Not after a waiting period, not after an assumption of voluntary absence, not after some threshold of time has passed. The law was passed in direct response to what Brian and Annette Swanson experienced in the first hours after their son went silent. They have credited it as the one piece of permanent change that came from what happened to Brandon. Since 2009, at least 4 additional states have adopted versions of Brandon's law. What the law cannot do is bring Brandon back. What it has done, in the 18 years since it was signed, is ensure that other families in Minnesota are not told to wait, are not told their adult child has every right to disappear, in the first hours after the people who know them best know that something is wrong. Annette Swanson has, in the years since 2008, given many interviews. She has spoken to CNN. She has spoken to the Pioneer Press. She has spoken to Forum News Service and to the Marshall Independent and to podcast hosts. And she has, by her own statement, consulted psychics, written to investigators, walked fields, and kept Brandon's case file in front of anyone who would look at it for almost 2 decades. In one of those interviews, conducted for the Marshall Independent Archive and republished by Forum News Service, she described what 18 years of not knowing feels like. She did not, in the published quotes, describe it as anger. She described it as something quieter. She said she still kept Brandon's room. She said she still expected, on certain mornings, to hear his car in the driveway. The Swansons have never stopped looking. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office continues to receive tips. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension re-examined the case in 2022. The FBI listing remains active. Brandon would be 37 years old now. He has been missing for 18 years and 8 days. If you drive the roads west of Marshall today, they look the way they looked in 2008. The shoulder has eroded in places. A few of the gravel runs have been resurfaced. There are more wind turbines on the horizon now than there were when Brandon was studying how to build them. But the geography is the same. The fields are the same fields. The fence lines run roughly where they ran. The Yellow Medicine River cuts through the same agricultural country, between the same towns. The The road where Brandon's car was found is still there. Lyon-Lincoln Road, off Highway 68, west of Taunton. You can drive it. You can stand at the place where the car was, in the ditch with its doors open. There is no marker. The ground is just ground. If you drove it at 2:30 in the morning, in mid-May, in a cold spring, you would understand something about this case that the daylight version of the same road does not communicate. You would understand how dark it gets. You would understand how few cars pass. You would understand how the lights of a town 25 miles away can look like the lights of a town 2 miles away if you have never been on this road before, and if you have left your glasses in the car. The searches did not stop in 2008. According to the public reporting by Forum News Service and the Marshall Independent, and according to the records kept by Jeff Hasse on the Search for Brandon Swanson blog, organized search activity has continued, in some form, every year since Brandon disappeared. The intensity has varied. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension has periodically re-examined the case, most recently in 2022. The Lyon County Sheriff's Office, currently under Sheriff Eric Wallen, has continued to receive and follow up on tips. Some tips have come from people in the area. Some have come from across the country. None of them, in 18 years, have led to Brandon. In 2021, when the drought drained long stretches of the Yellow Medicine River, the search effort returned to the riverbed. Sections that had been underwater since 2008 were exposed and walked. Areas that had only been searchable by sonar or by divers could be examined directly. According to Forum News Service coverage of the effort, the work was systematic. It covered the stretches of river closest to where the scent trail had ended. It covered the stretches downstream where current could have carried remains. It covered the stretches upstream that had not been worked in years. Nothing was found. This is, depending on how you interpret it, either the strongest evidence that Brandon is not in the river, or simply the confirmation that whatever is in the river is no longer where any search can locate it. The land the cattle farmers refused to allow searched has remained unsearched. This is not, strictly speaking, an accusation. The farmers in question have not been named publicly. The reasoning they gave investigators, according to Forum News Service, was the reasoning a person might give for many legitimate reasons. The inconvenience of strangers on working land, the risk to livestock, the simple privacy of property. They said they would watch their own ground. They said they would report anything that appeared. But there is, in the documented record, a portion of the geography Brandon walked through that has, in 18 years, never been comprehensively examined. Investigators know roughly where it is. Searchers know roughly where it is. Whatever is or isn't on that ground has remained there for 18 years, on land where cattle graze and crops cycle, and no organized search team has been permitted to work. This is one of the case's documented, unfilled spaces. It is named here because it is real. The Swansons have, in 18 years, never moved. They still live in Marshall. Annette has, in interviews going back to the late 2000s, described the decision not to leave. She has said, in different versions of the same answer, that if Brandon ever came home, she wanted him to come home to the house he knew. She has kept his room. She has kept his things. She has, in some interviews, described a recurring sense, the sound of a car in the driveway, late at night, that she gets up to check, that has not gone away. Brian Swanson has spoken less often than Annette, in the public record, but he has spoken. In a 2010 interview with CNN, he described the 47-minute phone call as the central event of his life. He said he had replayed it. He said he had thought about every sentence of it. He said he did not, in his own memory of the call, hear anything in his son's voice that would have predicted what came next. He has been asked, over the years, what he thinks happened. He has, in general, declined to publicly speculate. In one interview, paraphrased in subsequent coverage, he is reported to have said something close to, "There are theories he thinks are likely, and theories he thinks are not, and he does not want to put his theories in front of an investigation that might one day, on its own, find the answer." He has kept that posture for 18 years. There is a detail about the phone call that Brian Swanson has mentioned in more than one interview, and that has not been resolved in the years since. He has described the silence after, "Oh shit," as not entirely silent. He has said in some retellings that he thought he could hear something in the background. He has not been able to identify it. He has not, in the publicly available interviews, described it specifically, only that there was something there, in the open line, that he was not able to make sense of, and that ended, eventually, into pure silence. This is the kind of detail that the documented record does not let anyone build on. Brian Swanson has not said what he thought he heard. He has not said what he thought it meant. He has only said in the years since that he did not know what it was. Whatever it was the last thing on the line that came from his son's end. Brandon's case file remains open with the Lyon County Sheriff's Office. It remains active with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. It remains listed with the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program under the case number assigned to it in 2010. It remains current on NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, under his full name. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has, in recent years, produced age progression photographs of what Brandon might look like at 37. These age progression images are part of the long absence in their own way. They are the official record's attempt to keep up with the passage of time around a person who, on the documented record, stopped aging the morning of May 14, 2008. They show a face that the family has not seen. They are the closest the public record gets to imagining what Brandon would be now. 18 years. There is a tendency, in long-form true crime coverage of cases like this one, to arrive at the end of the runtime with a theory, to circle back to the most compelling possibility, to leave the listener with an answer, or with the implication of an answer, that the documented record cannot actually support. This telling will not do that. There is no answer here. There is a 47-minute phone call. There is a small car in a ditch with the doors open and the keys missing. There is a scent trail of 3 miles. There is a river that has been searched repeatedly and that has not produced him. There is pasture land that has not been searched, that has been watched by the people who own it for 18 years. There are theories, drowning, exposure, something else, none of which the documented record has confirmed, and none of which it has eliminated. There is a mother in Marshall, Minnesota, who still keeps her son's room. There is a father who, in his own description, can still replay the 47 minutes in his own head. There is a town and a road and a stretch of farmland that look the way they looked on the morning of May 14th, 2008. Minus a 19-year-old in a t-shirt and blue jeans who was walking toward lights he believed were Lynd, and that were not Lynd, and that no one has ever identified. Brandon Swanson said, "Oh shit," to his father on the phone at 2:30 in the morning on May 14th, 2008. Then there was something on the line that Brian Swanson could not identify. Then there was silence. Then there was 18 years. The lights he was walking toward have never been found. The keys to his car have never been turned up. The phone has never been recovered. The scent trail past the river has never been reconstructed. The land the cattle farmers asked not to be searched has never been searched. Brandon is 37 by the calendar. He is 19 in every other way that counts. This is a real case, real people. If you know anything about it, the relevant authorities can be contacted through the links in the description. If you enjoyed this episode, then welcome to Drowsy Detective. like the video, and share your thoughts on what you think happened to Brandon Swanson. Finally, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode, which is coming very soon.